And we're delighted to have Joel Feigin with us, whose piece, among others, was played at Carnegie Hall as part of the gala. Joel, welcome to our program.
Great to be here.
For those who don't know, Joel Feigin is an internationally performed composer. He writes operas and chamber music, orchestral music, and piano music. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read this quote from Opera Magazine because I love this quote. Your music is, quote, very strong impact, as logical in musical design as they are charged with emotion and drama. So that's a wonderful putting together of two things of
Yeah,
logic and passion, because
yeah,
sometimes I guess sometimes they don't always go together.
yeah.
Tell us, Joel, a little bit about the piece that was played. It was a quartet played by the Lena Quartet at Carnegie. And tell us about that piece and the title and when it was composed.
Right. The performance was great. This piece was written in the early 90s, and it was it was part of my Declaration of Independence that I didn't only have to write atonal music. And
Uh-huh.
so I set up writing a really hardcore classical quartet in four movements and the whole thing. And I really liked it, but it seemed, well, not, quite as um, kicking as it would be fun. So what I did at the suggestion of my wife is uh, yeah, Xeroxed the whole thing and printed it out, and each page was separate, threw them in the air, and they came down the way they came down, and and it was, kind of much better,
You,
and a lot of
you,
fun.
you didn't actually do that, did you?
Yeah, yeah, I did. I mean, I didn't, do it exactly. Like the first page on top was the first thing in the piece, and the second page beneath that was the second page of the piece. Not at all, but it suggested lots of things of how to juxtapose uh, these different sections in a really, for me, exciting way. And so and that's kind of where Mosaic came from,
Uh-huh.
the title. And so, for example, oh, good thing I have the score here. Uh, there are two panels, two movements, and the recap of the first movement, recap in the sonata form. The recap in the sonata form is towards the end of the second movement. And
Huh.
instead, the first movement goes into the slow movement. And there was a trio which appears both in the first and second panel, and an introduction that appears in both panels, etc. And that's a kind of thing I did. Um, and and so, and the development of the first movement happens after the slow movement as part of the first panel.
I
So that's
see.
the way it happened, and I like it a lot.
A little aleatoric, a little John Cageism in there, kind of
Well,
in
a
a
little,
way, in the sense of the randomness.
yeah. Well, in the end, it wasn't random. This was very suggestive. The process was random, or like Cage, but when I put it together in the final form, I was going for that logic and emotion.
Right, I see. So this so this was a piece from the '90s, and you said you get your independence. You broke free from atonal music, and
Yeah,
are you still free from atonal music? Are you liberated still?
yeah, yeah. I mean, like it's not like I rejected atonal music. As it were, I rejected what you might say was the 12-tone mafia.
Right,
That's the only thing. And so I've continued to write in both. It a lot
right.
depends on the emotion. Like I got in trouble once by saying, atonal music is great for angst, suffering, mystery. It's wonderful. But for joy, it's not so good. Doesn't do that really well. And I wanted to express joy as well. And so my pieces vary a lot in terms of some are purely tonal, some are purely atonal, and everything in between.
Yeah.
And I like the contrast.
I'm just finishing a 5-part radio series on the music of the Ukrainian composer Valentin Silvestrov. Yeah, I don't know if you
Yes,
know. I don't know if you know. Yeah,
yes,
and
he's
and
one.
he went through a avant-garde phase early in his career, and he's always asked, "Well, you threw that off." He said, "No, I didn't.
Yeah,
There are elements of the style and the sensibility that I carry with me." So he
absolutely.
evolved. Yeah. So you're saying really the same thing.
I think a lot of composers had that. Arvo Pärt had that very big, very powerfully. So I think it's a quite common thing that people have done of my generation, and I think that seeing my students, I really am excited about what the young generation is doing because they do anything and put anything in the world together, and the results can be very exciting.
Exactly. Now, tell us a little about you have an opera this is your third opera in progress,
Right,
Outcast at the Gate.
right,
It's a very provocative, maybe not provocative, it's an unusual title. And
right.
tell us about the opera.
Well, it's actually about refugees, and
Oh,
it's
uh-huh.
based on the last play of Sophocles. It's based on a play that he called Oedipus at Colonus, which is not the famous Oedipus. It's the 20, 30 years later when Oedipus has been a beggar, a refugee, supported only by his daughter, blind, really a mess across the world and rejected everywhere. Naturally, because he's given his thing with killing his father and marrying his mother. He's the ultimate undesirable refugee. And in this, which was Sophocles' last play, he's finally accepted, actually at Athens, as a citizen. And he finds a miraculous death where the gods are calling him in the middle of a big thunderstorm. He arrives at the beginning, and he and Antigone find the place they're in utterly numinous. It's like sacred. They just know that. And that's an alarm to let me know for 1:45. Anyway, um, the it's numinous, and then this guy comes and says, "Get out of there." That's the Grove of the Furies, which are the goddesses that punish things like killing your father and marrying your mother.
Right.
And Oedipus says, "I'm never going to leave here. This is where it was said I would die." Finding his home among the Furies. And if you think of it, where else is Oedipus going to find his home? And it was very interesting to write this, well, eerie, writing this opera in the last few years, because when Sophocles was writing the opera, Athens was falling apart. It was about to lose the Peloponnesian War, the government wasn't working, everything was a total mess.
Ringing a
And
bell.
ringing a bell, that's right. And this is what, I mean, his life was the golden age of Athens. And he was writing this piece. This is what was arising for him as it was all falling apart. And he died just before the final fall. And the Spartans were surrounding Athens, besieging it. And there's a story which is that he died and he wanted to be buried outside the gates in Colonus, which was his hometown. And so delegations spoke, and the Spartans said, "Oh, yes, absolutely. By all means, let Sophocles, the great poet, be buried where he wants to be." And I don't know that that would really happen nowadays, but it happened then, according to legend. Who
Right,
knows?
right, right. Fascinating. I hope it'll be staged soon. It's in being semi-staged or concert performances and rehearsals at the moment.
Well, at the moment, it has been in a lot of very exciting workshops, very successful. The ensemble score is about to be finished, about 15-piece chamber ensemble with electronics.
Ah,
My friend Brandon Raleigh, former student, dear friend, is doing the electronics. It needed it because no one knows the story now, or very few people do. So you have to tell it, and there was no place in the plot to do that effectively. So I figure we'll start at the beginning. But to have someone go out and briefly tell the story was not going to work theatrically at all.
Right.
So what we have is we recorded a wonderful actress telling the story, and added actually this. We derived the sounds pre-recorded from the sound of the Han, which is a big slab of wood hit by a big wooden mallet, which can play very loud and very soft. And the Han brings the Zen monks to meditation in Zen monasteries. And so there's a 15-minute roll down, which it's actually kind of based on. So this is happening between and setting off the story, creating the context of the story with the electronics, the story from every corner of the space.
Right, right.
And so that was very exciting. And there's going to be like the death of Oedipus will have, throughout there's going to be some electronics. And there, as I said, there's this huge storm in which the god calls Oedipus, and there's going to be a lot of electronics for that. A lot of thunder and lightning and what have you.
Well, it sounds very exciting. I'll be eager to see that if it makes its way to the East Coast, where I am. I'm in Boston. Yeah. And do you have any orchestral pieces that are coming up, or that you've recently composed?
Yeah. Well, not so recently, but I have 2 orchestra pieces. Well, there's the piano concerto, which is for orchestra. I have string orchestra pieces, which on the piano concerto, and also 2 others are on the latest CD from Toccata, which has the title Chamber Music or Chamber Orchestra Music of Joel Feigin, which is perhaps the not super most exciting title, but anyway, that's what they wanted. And it has the piano concerto, it has 2 string orchestra pieces, Searching Seas, and the chamber orchestra version of the string quartet, actually.
Oh, I see.
And I have 2 full orchestra pieces called Outcast at the Gate is on my mind. Festive Overture, and Elegy for Otto Luning. This is a dear friend of mine. He died in his 90s, in the 1990s, I think. Yeah. And this is an elegy for him.
I knew Otto briefly when I was in New York.
Yeah, he's a great guy. Yeah. And he was kind of, when I knew him, he's kind of a sage in his apartment on Riverside Drive, and Charles Warren and all sorts of people would come up. And there's a story, which I guess is okay to tell, that Charles came up. Otto told my wife and myself, well, do you know Charlie Warren? And we said, yeah, of course. And he said, well, Charlie was here the other day, and I told him you're not a pro until you have 4 style changes. You got to have those style changes, otherwise you're not a pro. So it was cute. So I don't think particularly of Warren having drastic style changes, but he felt he did.
He wrote a piece of that, I don't know what to call it. I loved the piece. It was called someone called it just a throwaway piece. I totally loved it. It's called the Kentucky Rondo.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah,
it's just something about
it. Maybe that was a style change.
Well, that was something. I used it as a theme song, quote unquote, when I was at WBUR in Boston when I started my career.
Fantastic. That's just great.
I can still hear that piece in my head. As simple little piece.
Yeah.
He was probably never in Kentucky either, but
probably. I doubt it. I mean, I'm really into simple. I wouldn't say I always write simple pieces, but I tell my students, I play slow movement often of Mozart's Last Piano Concerto, and I can say, if you can write that simply and that beautifully, I'll study with you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm anxious to hear the Toccata recording. It's on Toccata Classics. It's your piano music, including the piano concerto. And
actually, it's string orchestra music, including the piano concerto. There's going to be a new Toccata CD coming out probably this winter with some piano music and some chamber music. And the chamber pieces were done at a concert in New York featuring my work this last spring. So the chamber pieces are a piano trio written around the same time as the string quartet, and a violin piano piece written a few years later.
Yeah.
And the violin piano piece is more towards my atonal style, but has some tonal stuff. And the trio is even more than the quartet, my breakthrough piece. I am going to write a piano trio in G major, and I don't care what anyone says, kind of thing. So those two, there'll be a new CD there in this winter. And the remainder of the piano piece, and as yet unsure CD, not just figured out yet, chamber pieces will be on another CD a year later, hopefully.
Right. Well, Joel Feigin, you're all over the place, and it's wonderful to have you on this program. We're eager to hear your pieces. I'm going to go check out the Toccata piece right now.
Fantastic.
And I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. This is great. A lot of fun. Great to speak
Joel.
to you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.